The best part of my off season is picking up the preview magazines at the grocery store and reading how the experts feel about the teams I care about. Now, times have changed a little bit since we get nonstop info online, but just like the tunnel walk in Lincoln, Tommy Trojan at USC, or the whiteout at Penn State, some traditions don't ever go away. Phil Steele's college football preview is an off-season tradition, at least for me it is, and since I've got all of you to share my excitement with, it's become a tradition that we spend a few minutes to read through it together. So today, I'm running through the best preview magazine out there to see what Phil Steele's thoughts are on Nebraska and how he thinks things are going to go in Matt Rhule's second season. But what's up, guys? I'm Connor Hayden, and this is Corn Crazed. If you're a fan of Nebraska or the Big Ten, hit the subscribe button below so you don't miss my year 2 expectations video. And if you still buy preseason magazines, hit the like button now, because if this isn't an annual off-season tradition, I don't know what is. But now, let's get into it.
He's hit and set. He's taking a shot downfield, wide open end zone, caught, touchdown.
This video isn't sponsored, so I could have used any preseason magazine to react to, but I didn't. I chose to rock with Phil for a reason. If you look at his Twitter, he posts thank yous to all the coaches he has one-on-one conversations with, and they feed him plenty of info about their roster, the projected depth chart, other teams around the conference, and really good recruiting insights. So every year, his predictions finishes the most accurate that came out before the season started. And I know people are impressed with my random knowledge of the sport, but I don't just know this stuff. I study it. I read magazines like this front to back. I listen to a bunch of podcasts and I watch random games that nobody else cares about. But a lot of the ways I learn about the current landscape of college football is from this specific preview. My videos got really popular because I do deep dives with my own personal opinions later, and Phil's content is very similar. His magazines are in-depth. They're all recently updated takes, and they're made for the sicko fan, not the casual. Right now, I'm just going over the sections that include Nebraska, so top draft eligible players, individual unit rankings, and most improved teams. But there's a lot more to this preview if you read it by yourself, and you can see which teams are trending up, what the turnover aggression percentages are hitting at, power rankings, and a bunch of other stuff that people who really want to study the sport would be into. But let's start off with the top draft eligible players. And these are guys who've been in school at least 2 years and are going into their third. So it's pretty much just juniors and seniors. But we're going to start off at receiver. This list only got 75 guys on it. And coming in at that 75th spot is Jamal Banks. And for comparison, Marcus Washington cracked the top 50 last season. So it's a telling sign for how young and unproven this room is. Banks is 6'4". He led Wake in receiving last year, and he played in 43 games so far in his career. So based on this ranking, he's not what the scouts are looking for in an NFL receiver. But a year going up against some of the best DBs in the entire country could really boost his stock if he puts up good numbers. Barrett Liebentritt ranks 14th at fullback, and he only played 7 games before he got hurt, so I'm glad he earned a spot on here, but I just don't think enough teams use fullbacks, and this past draft, I didn't even see one get taken. It's a win for Nebraska to get a guy mentioned, but he's barely scratched the surface as far as potential goes, so he's a wait and see before we talk about NFL potential. At center, Ben Scott makes his second appearance in a row at number 20, but he ranked 11th last year, so he fell down on this list a little bit. Now, there are 7 Big Ten guys ahead of him here, but the most shocking was that Ohio State's got 2 guys at center inside the top 13. Now, only 12 centers got taken in the 2023 draft, so he's got a lot of work to do. But top 20 at this position is still impressive, especially after playing on one of the worst offenses in the entire country. In last year's preview, Turner Corcoran ranked 25th at tackle, but he fell off the list this time around, and only Bryce Benhart cracked the top 80 at number 55. And Benhart finished as an honorable mention All-Big Ten lineman last season. And in year 2 with the new system, he's in a great position to take another step forward. What's craziest at tackle is that the top 2 guys both play at LSU. And in the Big Ten, both Wisconsin and Iowa have their left and their right tackles ranked higher than Benhart. The line's definitely building back, but we're some years away before they start looking like they fit in with the rest of the conference. On defense, Jamari Butler played his way into the 41st spot at defensive end after he started 6 games under Tony White, and he earned honorable mention All Big Ten. And I think he's the best example to show that you don't even need an entire season to prove yourself. You just need a few big performances like he had against Maryland, Wisconsin, and Iowa. At tackle, Hutmaker ranks 36th and Robinson's 31st, making those two of the best candidates to get drafted off this current team. And think about this. As a first-year starter, Nash finished with 8 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks. Ty was less productive with only 29 tackles and I think 4 for a loss, but he's still regarded as one of the top 3 NFL defenders on this team. This year is huge because Ty had a healthy offseason, unlike what he went through a year ago. Nash knows what it takes to be a starting tackle in the Big Ten, and he changed his body composition with the new staff. These two might have the highest ceilings in terms of potential, and they could go from honorable mention All Big Ten to fighting for the second team. Javen Wright's the 64th of 65 outside linebackers. And honestly, knowing what he's been through health-wise, that's awesome for him. He only played in 3 games his first 3 seasons. Then he came in as a rotator last year, and he ended up with 51 tackles, tying for second on the team. He forced 3 turnovers, returns as an obvious starter next to John Bullock, and at 6'5", he plays a crucial role as a pass defender against tight ends and the slot receivers. And last, the highest rated NFL prospect on the entire team is Tommy Hill as the 15th best corner. Now, when he first transferred in, Travis Fisher said he was an absolute NFL player, but it took Matt Rhule to figure out how to maximize his skill set to help him break out and show he could be that guy. 9 pass breakups and 4 interceptions later, and he's up there with Isaac Gifford for the best or the most impactful player on the entire team. He spent half of last season on offense, but now with a clear plan for his future, Tommy's going to take a huge step forward, and he might be this defense's Cam Taylor-Britt. I think the biggest difference from this year and last is that this year's list has proven talent. Last year it was all just hope. Jeff Sims, MJ Sherman, and Arik Gilbert all got ranked based off their potential and their names instead of their proven production. But this time around, every one of these guys we talked about has already shown what role they play in this system. Moving on to the individual unit rankings, and these guys made a massive jump from last season. The D-line didn't even crack the top 66 nationally, but now they're so damn high, it took me a second to find out they were ranked inside the top 5. Think about that. This D-line had the exact same front. One offseason took them from 0 expectations to the top individual unit on the entire team, ranking higher than Georgia, Florida State, Notre Dame, and Iowa. And Phil's note says the Huskers allowed just 93 rushing yards a game and had 32 sacks last year. They returned all key players, including their dominating interior duo of Nash and Ty, who were both NFL prospects. Rhule calls this group the strength of his top-notch D. The linebacker unit ranks 19th nationally and 7th in the Big Ten, right behind Michigan. But think about that. They lost Nick Henrich and Luke Reimer, who were multi-year starters, and Phil thinks that this room got better. And I think he's right. Bayer, Bullock, Wright, and Thompson all have multiple games of starting experience. Sherman and Princewell are both established at Jack, and they played great. For the first time in a long time, the position groups that lose the most aren't just falling off the face of the earth. They're reloading and they're improving at every single spot. 9th in the Big Ten and 30th nationally, I think this DB room's getting a little disrespected here. You look at who's back. 2-year starter Malcolm Hartzog, 2-year starter Isaac Gifford, 2-year starter Marquise Buford Jr., even though I think he missed 8 games last season. Tommy Hill, who's arguably the best player on the team. Bly Hill, who transferred in and played like a starter out of the gate. And that doesn't even include Kobe Bretz, who enters year 4, former starting safety Deshaun Singleton, who's going to be back for fall camp, and 3 younger guys behind him who've all got a ton of potential. This is the group you look at and know they have all of the pieces in the world, but they need to get back to full strength to see if they can be the elite unit that we expect them to be. Swapping over to offense, we're going to start with the O-line, who ranks 9th in the Big Ten and 40th nationally. But let's focus on the best part. Phil thinks Nebraska's offensive line deserves to be ranked one spot better than Iowa. Now, this unit's made massive strides under Rhule because not only have they added two multi-year Power 5 starters from the portal during the last two cycles, but they actually developed the young guys like Henry Lutovsky and Justin Evans and turned them into starters. 1 year under Matt Rhule, and this O-line's ranked as the best individual unit on the entire offense, which to me sounds like a win. The running backs are ranked 50th nationally and 11th in the Big Ten, right between Washington and USC. But the hardest part about ranking this group is that you don't really know what it's going to look like. Are Ramir and Gabe fighting for the starting spot with Emmett Johnson now that they're healthy off injury? How much does the running backs role change now that the offense has a star QB with serious weapons on the outside? This might be the most intriguing unit on the entire team because of the unknowns and the fact that they're ranked higher than Washington, who features a back who was all Pac-12 last year. And it just tells me that Phil believes in the depth and that having three guys who've all started Big Ten games, even though they've dealt with plenty of injuries, it gives Nebraska multiple options, even if one of them falls off. Receivers rank 45th nationally and 7th in the Big Ten ahead of Michigan and Penn State, which definitely surprised me because even with IGC back healthy, Banks and Nair from the portal, and a year in the program for Coleman and Lloyd, this unit's never played with a QB like Dylan, and they're all finding new roles in this updated offense. Alex Bullock's the only receiver in the entire room who started more than 3 Big Ten games. So although I'm optimistic and I see the vision that Glenn Thomas and Matt Rhule have, I'm not bought into the idea that this is just going to work come fall. It's another see it to believe it situation. The QB room ranks 56th nationally behind Hawaii, North Texas, Colorado State, and Vanderbilt. But this just sets those guys up for a massive coming out party because Harburg wasn't a great passer last year, but being in a room with Dylan, who can allow him to play a situational role, makes the QB run game a major threat. And if Dylan's just 30% better as a passer than what we saw last year, this room's going to jump Wisconsin, Purdue, and Iowa to rank somewhere close to the top 30. And last, we've got the special teams that ranks 57th nationally. And the only positive takeaway here is that there's a lot of room to grow. I'm not sure how Phil can rank this unit that high after they finished somewhere in the 90s last year, but maybe he just likes that they return both their starters. Alvano and Buschini were both inconsistent last season, but they both have extremely high ceilings given their history. The return game never really got going after Amir's huge return at Minnesota, but there's hope that Ja'Cory Barney or somebody else can take over as a key returner. I wouldn't call the disaster under Ed Foley a red flag after just one season, but if they don't get it together this time around, Rhule's going to have to make some big changes because he wants to compete with Michigan and Iowa, who are winning games with their elite special teams, and Nebraska's just not at that point yet. Next, we've got to talk about lost and returning all-conference players because this category told us that LSU, Florida State, and Kansas would all improve and that both Minnesota and Illinois would regress. So this system was spot on for all 5 of those teams, and it's definitely something you can count on. Now, the scoring system assigns different values to All-Americans and first, second, or third team players. And then based on that score, you get an idea of how teams who lost that much production are going to perform the following season. Nebraska scores -12 here, and they rank 9th in the Big Ten with 2 players lost in this category. But schools like Michigan, UCLA, Penn State, Indiana, and Washington all scored between -30 and -90. And this formula says if you score between -26 and -47, you have an 80% chance of regressing the following year, meaning Oregon, Illinois, and those other 5 schools I mentioned are all due for regression. This is just one of my favorite things to look at because Phil's so accurate in his predictions with this one category alone. The last thing to check out before the overview for Nebraska is the most improved teams list. Last year, he had 9 of his top 11 teams on that list go from a losing record the year before to a bowl game. Now, some of those schools were Oklahoma, App State, and Boston College, which were all teams who won 3 or 4 more games than they won the year before. And here's why this is such an important category. In the last 2 years, 82% of the teams that made this list following a bad season either matched their win total or exceeded it, with 76% of those making a bowl game. Now, last year, Nebraska ranked 15th here, and they missed a bowl by 1 game. But this time around, Phil's confidence in Rhule went through the roof, and he's got him listed as the #2 most improved team in the entire country. So, statistically speaking, there's about an 80% chance that this team makes it to a bowl game. Before we wrap up with Phil's season forecast, I want to shout out the Character Chronicles for sponsoring today's show and for helping me put out content all off season. Adam's been covering Nebraska football on YouTube for about a year now, and he's putting content out as much or more often than I am. And I get so many messages from subscribers asking how they can support me to make sure I can keep putting out content. And I speak for all creators when I say the #1 way to support is to subscribe, like the videos, and leave a comment for the algorithm. So if you want more content from guys like Adam, make sure you're subscribed to his channel by clicking the link in the description box below, and he'll keep the amazing insight and the really good interviews coming. Last, we've got the full season forecast, and these 2 pages are packed with info about the position groups, the depth chart, proven experience, last year's record with stats, and the last 10 years of their record against the spread. But I'm going to go through and give you the short version for what he thinks about this team. Then, if you want to read it yourself, I'm not spoiling it completely. He ranks Nebraska 7th in the Big Ten, right behind USC and 1 spot ahead of Rutgers. And after 1 season, he still considers Rhule an A+ hire, even though he didn't make it to a bowl game in year 1. He thinks the -17 turnover margin is almost impossible to replicate. And by default, this team's at least 1 game better since the strength of schedule is almost identical to what we saw last year. Now, last season, he didn't have any Nebraska players listed as first or second team All Big Ten, but now he's got both Nash and Micah Mazuka on the second team. Ben Hart and Gifford are on the third, and Ben Scott, Ty Robinson, and Jamari Butler are on the fourth. 5 All Big Ten caliber guys last year, but now he thinks there are 7, and he has all of those guys ranked higher, which is obviously a really good sign. On offense, he's predicting they jump from 18 points a game all the way up to 26.8 this season, which is almost a 9-point swing now that they've upgraded to O-line, receiver, and QB. And his depth chart lists Gabe Ervin as the #1, Ramir Johnson as the 2, and Emmett Johnson as the #3, with Janiran Bonner as the starting slot next to Isaiah Nair and Jamal Banks, which honestly was really surprising to me. The main point he makes on offense is that even though they lose their 2 starting guards in Ethan Piper and Nuri Nuili, 8 of the top 10 are back on the line. Plus, they added Micah Mazuka, who started over 20 games in the Big 12 and the SEC. On defense, he considers the line the strength, and he expects the DBs to regress a little bit after losing Sanford, Newsome, and Omar Brown. But with 6 of the top 8 linebackers back, he thinks they're going to improve on their 304 yards a game. Basically, Phil thinks the defense is in a great position with 8 starters returning, but his whole point of optimism for Rhule in year 2 comes down to 2 things: the staff's history in their second year, and obviously correcting the embarrassing turnover margin that is for sure bound to improve. These are all Phil Steele's takes, which are pretty similar to mine, but I respect his opinion because of how accurate he's been for so many years now and how much research he does on each team, even though he's got to go through all 134 of them. And now that I've got this preview, I'm going to spend the next couple of weeks reading about the rest of the conference and the other teams on the schedule so I can start building out my full season record prediction. But if you want to get into the weeds and get yourself fully prepared for this season, and again, this is not sponsored, I'm not being paid for it, even though I should be, I highly recommend you go out and buy the Phil Steele College Football Preview. That's just, me telling you I love you, and I want to make sure that you're not missing out. But I want to know what you think, so let me know in the comments below. Is the D-line actually top 5 nationally, or do you think they just played a weak schedule? Will the O-line improve on last year's momentum and protect their QBs, or does Dylan need to be a pro at getting the ball out quick? And what's your go-to preseason magazine? Are you reading Phil Steele or Athlons, or do you just click on the links you find online? I'm forever tied to this tradition of picking up a summer magazine and actually flipping through it and reading it. But I'm just glad that now I've got more people to share the experience with. But that's all I've got for today. So until next time, thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one. Go Big Red.